welcome Neil from SimCorp, one of the companies that recently made a really big transition using Scaled Agile. And welcome, Neil.
Thank you, Mattias. Nice to be here.
All right, you want to introduce yourself?
Yep. So my name's Neil Cook. I'm one of the enterprise agile coaches at SimCorp. Prior to our transition to SAFe, I was running one of the development teams there. And when the guys from Chris came in, I joined the part of the transformation team and worked closely with them during the transition phase and then beyond that.
So this was a pretty amazing journey you did during 12 to 13 months from start to finish, which is an ongoing learning. But why did you get started with SAFe?
Yep. So the original decision for going with SAFe was really one that was taken by our CTO. He could see the need for change in the organisation, and I think for him, he likes the prescriptive nature of SAFe over and above what some of the other frameworks gave. So it sort of gave a sort of almost a complete picture of where we could go, and that was something that he really liked. Probably the most important thing, though, was the fact that as it was a decision by the CTO, that meant that the change, once it started, was then going to continue and there was no going back. So having that support from the top, from the early days, meant that it really instilled the change in the organisation, and that's helped us to keep moving forward through the tough times. So
that meant you had support pretty much from the beginning, and you will know that there is some backing on this journey.
Exactly, yes. Yeah, that's right, yeah.
So can you just tell me briefly what were the earliest steps that you took to get going?
Yep, so I mean, the first thing was there was an announcement which came from sort of the senior leadership team that this was a journey that we were going to go on, and there was kind of no going back. That was the first thing that got us going. Then to actually really get things moving, we formed a team within the company of people who would help us start on this journey. And obviously that was when we engaged with you guys from CRISP. And the first thing, probably the first major step, was having you guys in to come and give some education and some training to some of the senior leaders in the company and to the middle managers, because these are the people we really needed to bring on board and have with us on the journey. Without them, I think it's a real battle. So that was probably the first main thing. And then I'd say the second major thing to get going was when we ran an internal conference for the whole of our development organisation. So we did a 2-day conference. We invited external speakers, and really the idea of this was to energise people and inspire them. And I think we really achieved that. So and off the back of that was when that's when we really started to get rolling. So.
Yeah, well, you preceded my next questions. Like, at what point did you feel that you got some traction out of the change?
I think really the main thing was when we we're a relatively large organisation, so we end up running with 8 different agile release trains, and I think at the point when we actually got the last one moving and they and we had everybody working the same way, I think that's probably the moment when it felt like things were really going. Prior to that, there'd been, there's still some conflicts in the organisation with people working the old way and some people working the new way. So I think once everyone was on board and moving and learning, I think that was the moment when it felt like things were actually starting to happen.
And can you elaborate a little bit of what might be tricky parts?
I think there's lots of tricky parts. I think when you go into something like this, it's never going to be easy. You shouldn't go into it thinking this is going to be an easy transition. There's lots of parts. So I mean, you've got the people side of it. So people are taking on, for many people, are taking on a brand new role, something that they've not done before. So maybe they're losing some of their old responsibility and taking on new ones. For us in particular, it was more also the technology side. So our product wasn't necessarily well suited to, our product and some of the practices weren't really well suited to a more agile way of working. So that's also one of the pain points you hit from the start. So I'd say they're probably the 2 of the bigger ones.
All right. Well, one of the challenges I found interesting that you actually found some different solutions for was you actually work on different geographical sites. That's a fact that you are of the size. I'm a little bit curious about what type of patterns did you try out or in the situations where you basically had development happening over sites.
Yep. So our development organisation is really split across 4 sites. So we've got two large sites and 2 smaller ones. And so by the nature of our old setup, then we had to span the sites. I'd say, if possible, try to avoid it. But if it is inevitable, then I think some of the it's really about getting people coming together and communicating. So having the PI planning events is a great thing. That brings everyone together every couple of months. That kind of re-energises people and gets people aligned on what they're doing. So that's probably one of the key points, and that's something, if you buy into SAFe, that you kind of get as part of it. I think also, some of the standard ceremonies that you have with Scrum, things like daily stand-ups for alignment are key, and making sure that they're accessible to everyone. And then even simple things like having good ways of sharing information. So tools like Slack can really help, although it's not necessarily a substitute for face-to-face communication. The fact that everyone can be contactable at any time, even if you've got a small question, I think really helps.
And I'm curious about the peer planning. When you have teams that distributed over different sites, do you generally try to fly them into the peer planning, or do they in some way participate remotely? Yep.
So I'd say generally we've flown people in. So it's I think it's one of the key things is to get everyone together. There's obviously times when you can't do that. It could be for financial reasons or just because people can't travel. And I think what we find is that generally makes things a bit harder. So things don't quite flow as well. So I think if you've got people spread out, then if at all possible, then get them together for the PI planning. And if it's a real problem, then maybe try to shrink the PI planning from the time period that SAFe recommends to something that you can afford. So you could potentially aim to shrink it to 1 day or something to reduce the overall cost of that if that's a problem.
Right, good. And looking back, it's still very early on your journey, but what type of outputs have you observed so far?
Yep. So I think it's probably too early to say we've got any noticeable outputs on the outside, but I think we can definitely see some of our internal metrics are moving quite significantly. So, for example, we used to have quite a long integration phase towards the end of each release. We realised the benefit of practices like continuous integration, so we can see that the metrics around how long code sits without being integrated are really sort of trending in the right direction. That's on a steep downward slope. I think similarly with some of our internal quality metrics. So because of the fact that we now fix defects as we go, we're not carrying around a whole bunch of defects which we have to fix at the end of release. We're still carrying around some of the old backlog, but we can even see or the old defect backlog, but we can even see that that's now starting to trend downwards. And we've put a lot of focus on that in the last 6 months with introducing zero defect mindset to sort of to help people understand how important it is to build the quality in. And then we see the combination of those two things then gives us much better metrics on things like our testing pass rates, so things around unit test pass rates and some of our integration tests. So I think they're probably some of the more significant changes we've seen where things are really moving in the right direction.
Cool. How has Agile, in the scale that you're running so far, to your observation, impacted the organization?
I think there's probably 2 things that really stand out, I would say. One is that people are much more willing to just try stuff out. So I think previously we'd like to feel like we were in control, so we'd spend a lot of time analysing problems, designing solutions before we rolled them out on a big scale. I think now people are much more willing to say, let's just give it a try, see what happens. And then sort of along the same lines as well, I think there's some some of the things that we'd been doing for a long time that were never really challenged because that's how we'd always done them. I think now people with sort of more of a continuous improvement mindset are now starting to challenge those. The next real step for us beyond that is then to actually enable people to take control or to take responsibility to actually start to fix those things themselves. But I think we've now got the point where people feel comfortable, speaking up and saying, actually, is this really the best way of doing things? Could we do this differently? So I think it's really more of a mindset shift. Is probably some of the more significant stuff we've seen.
That's pretty interesting. It has had some impact on your culture.
Yes, for sure.
So far. That's cool. Now, if I would be someone who is thinking to embark on this journey, what would you recommend me?
I think I would say just get going. I think there's similar to the previous point, I think we probably spent a little bit too long thinking about it up front and trying to make sure that we felt in control of what was about to happen. And I think when you're doing something on this kind of scale, you're never really going to, no matter how much you think it through, you're never really going to know what the outcome's going to be. So I think it's really about just sort of getting going and doing it and being prepared for the fact that you're going to learn along the way. And some things will work and some things won't. But I'm not sure that sitting and analysing it for any length of period up front would really help you with that. So I think just do it is probably the biggest thing.
Cool. So keep experimenting and actually do the implementation agile as well.
Yep. So just get going, get the teams going. If you're using something like Safe, then get the release trains up and running and get them learning, because there's no substitute for actually feeling what it's like and actually learning from that. So
it's a good answer. I want to thank you for coming here.
Hey,
and
no problem.
Hope to follow up on your experiments in the future.
Yep, cool. It's great to see you. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.